Have you signed up to the new Chasing Cars newsletter, a great monthly roundup of our best stories, videos, and comparisons that's easy to share with your family and friends? You'll even get a free Chasing Cars sticker delivered to your door. How? chasingcars.com.au/newsletter. I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Lexus UX Crafted edition. UX is the smallest Lexus SUV, and last week we also learned that the brand is soon to delete their CT hatchback after a very long run here in Australia. So that will mean the UX also does duty as the entry-level Lexus vehicle in Australia as a whole. But as we'll find out in today's video, the UX doesn't feel like a cheap way into a Lexus. Instead, it is a genuine slice of luxury motoring in a small crossover package, and the UX is usefully small. Compared to some rivals from the other luxury manufacturers, this car is actually genuinely compact. That makes it nice and easy to maneuver in the city, and yet it still feels like it can hold its own on a country road or on a highway, thanks to the high quality TNGA platform that underpins this car. And I'll explain what that means and why it helps when we take this UX 200 Crafted Edition out onto the road. Speaking of Crafted Edition, that's the special celestial blue paint, the black wheels, the black garnishing around the car, and a few special features that you get inside the black and blue two-tone interior. But the UX range as a whole is pretty significant and complicated, and that's because the UX is a popular car for the Lexus brand in Australia. There's petrol versions, hybrid versions, two-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, and you can really take this car from about $50,000 drive away, way up into the $70,000 range if you want, a truly well-finished, luxurious, small Lexus SUV. So, speaking of that interior, let's jump in and see what it's like. Just like the outside of the UX, the interior of this car is a bit more funky than your traditional Lexus. This brand are known for their big spindle grille that sits at the front of all of their cars, but the UX has given the designers a little bit more license to create a product that feels a bit more youthful, I would say, than most Lexus vehicles. And that's especially the case inside the Crafted Edition, which is finished in a two-tone black and blue, not a combination that is seen that often, but I actually think it works fairly well in this car. Design is subjective. You can let me know what you think of the color scheme down below this video. But essentially, the UX 200 Crafted Edition is just the latest special edition version of a small SUV that we've really quite liked since it launched here in Australia a few years ago. And that's because while it doesn't have the fancy turbo engines of some of its rivals, what it does have is immensely good build quality instead. And you do feel like you're sitting in a little bank vault here in the UX. Everything feels screwed together in such a way that's worthy of the Lexus badge that is synonymous with quality, reliability, durability, and it feels like it's going to go the distance. So, there's good materials everywhere, really soft steering wheel, soft doors, but not soft down here where your leg rests, which is a little bit unusual for a Lexus, but there's no creaks, no rattles, nothing of that character. Now, the seats we're sitting on also sport this cool black and blue two-tone color scheme, but they aren't leather at this level in the UX range. You most certainly can get leather as you work up the range, particularly with the F Sport, which is a little bit more athletic looking, and then the Sport Luxury, which is kind of what you would do if you wanted to buy a UX that reminded you of a high-end, larger Lexus. The Crafted Edition is based on the entry-level luxury, and these cars get what Lexus calls new luxe, or I don't know, Ponch would call it vinyl, but artificial leather seats. Now, they do feel soft and plush and comfy. They do also have heating in the Crafted Edition, but as we know from testing new luxe in summer, they can get a little bit more sweaty. And that means that you might want to consider moving up to a model that has leather seats with heating and ventilation, which is basically all of the UX models above this car in the range. Where you do get leather is here on the steering wheel and on the gear shifter as well. And of course, you can choose a model higher than the luxury or the Crafted in the range if you want a few more of those opulent features. But what you get as standard on every UX is this 10.3-inch screen here, controlled by the Lexus Remote Touch trackpad. Now we know by the new NX, which has already been revealed, and I've done a detailed video explaining that car, Lexus are going to be moving to a much larger touchscreen in future, and this interface is going to be ditched. And that's fine because it's never been one of the best, but you do learn it quickly, and as an owner, I think it'd be fine to put up with it. Now the UX has some cool shortcut keys here on this little jut out console near the center armrest, and that's pretty cool. So we've got volume, we've got tuning, we've got radio and media buttons. I quite like that setup. In front of the driver, the non-F Sport models have a 7-inch digital display encased in this cool circle. You can look at your trip computer info, you see safety info, next navigation direction, etc. And then the F Sport has a slightly more sporty looking version of the same instrument cluster. Now, navigation is standard on the car, but unusually for a Lexus, you have to pay more if you want DAB digital radio. And in fact, the Crafted edition doesn't have that feature. So it's a bit funny where on the entry-level UX 200 Luxury, for example, you don't get keyless entry and push-button start. So even though that car is attractively priced underneath $45,000, you quickly realize that unlike on most other Lexus products, you do have to add some enhancement packs, or you need to look at the models up the range in order to feel like you're getting a really well kitted out car. And then it can start to become quite expensive. Like this Crafted is just over 60 grand drive away. I spec'd up my perfect UX, which is a two-wheel drive hybrid 250h as a sport luxury in green over tan with the enhancement pack, which gives that car a sunroof and a heads-up display, and that was just over $70,000 drive away. And then suddenly, for what's supposed to be the entry level to the Lexus lineup, you're getting expensive. And even here in this Crafted, a very nice Mazda CX-5 is considerably cheaper. So make sure you do cross-shop alternatives to make sure you're driving your dollar as far as you can take it. But the driving position is really good, the materials are good, the sound quality is all right, the technology works well, and all in all, you do feel like you're sitting in a luxury model rather than a mainstream car. But let's check out the back seat and see what life is like there. Here in the back seat, it's clear that the Lexus UX is really designed for two up front most of the time, but there is enough practicality in this car to carry 4 adults if you need to. So for myself, it's 6 foot. Headroom is actually really good, even though we have the moonroof on this car. Legroom is fine. Tow room is a little constricted, but nothing I'd complain about too much. Now you could get someone in the middle in an emergency if you had to, but the seat itself is tiny and it's a real perch. So I think people would be more comfortable if you treated it as a 4-seater with this nice flip down armrest with a pair of cup holders. We've also got ISOFIX points, nice and easy to access here in the back. We've got air vents and we have 2 powered USB ports as well. Just one map pocket, it's here behind the passenger seat. And in terms of material quality in the back, unfortunately we regress to scratchy plastics. Now Lexus aren't alone in doing this on their entry-level models, but a reminder, this car is over 60 grand, and so that doesn't feel too luxurious. One thing that Lexus do better than their colleagues at Toyota though with their small SUV is that you can actually see out the window of the UX in the back, unlike the Toyota CHR. So that means that kids will get less car sick back here. Here around the back of the Lexus UX, you can see more of this sort of futuristic design language that does suit this funky little SUV, I reckon. And this light bar, it does light up with the headlights. So at night, it has a very distinctive signature driving behind this car. Celestial blue paintwork, as I mentioned, that's also pretty cool. And the Crafted edition does add a power tailgate to the mix, among a bunch of other features. That's a bit of an indulgence on a small SUV, but it opens up to reveal a pretty good sized boot for a compact car like this. 419 litres is the measurement, and as you can see, it may not be the neatest, but getting the Chasing Cars suitcases into this boot is no issue. And you can even see out the rear window once you've got them all in. Now underneath those suitcases, there is a nice sturdy boot floor, and you can drop those back seats for even more practicality. But because the Crafted edition is optioned up with 18-inch wheels, like some models in the UX lineup, it gets run flat tires rather than a spare wheel under the boot floor. If you go for a model with 17-inch wheels, which is what I would recommend for the ride quality and refinement benefits, you do get a spare wheel under that boot floor. The tires aren't run flat. As I mentioned, power tailgate. You've also got a button there to lock the car so you can just walk away. But the last thing we'll do before we drive the UX 200 is talk about running costs for this vehicle. The running costs on the Lexus UX really depend on whether you buy a UX 200 petrol or the UX 250h hybrid, which runs a 2-litre petrol engine with significant electric assistance, either front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. Naturally, the hybrid uses less fuel than the basic UX 200 petrol. In terms of fuel consumption, with the UX 200, you can expect about 8.5 litres per 100 Ks combined, whereas the hybrid will drive that right down to about 5.5 litres per 100 Ks. However, the hybrid models are more expensive to buy in the first place, so you've got to factor in how long you're going to keep this car to determine whether or not you'll recoup that initial extra outlay. Now, in terms of insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $1,078 to comprehensively insure a new Lexus UX. Everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how the car's garaged, who drives the car, driving histories, and the like. Servicing, Lexus provides you with 3 cap price services for this car. The intervals are 12 months or 15,000 Ks, and the prices are each $495, adding up to $1,485 over those 3 years. And lastly, the warranty on the car is 4 years with 100,000 kilometers, which is certainly no longer the most generous in the luxury space, as Mercedes-Benz offer 5 years with unlimited kilometers. So we've looked at the UX's high quality interior, its practical boot, and we've discussed the running costs of this baby Lexus. Now, let's talk about what makes it special on road, because there are a few key things that separate it from its main rivals, and its main rivals are cars like the Audi Q2 and Q3, the BMW X1, although that is quite a bit bigger, and the Mercedes-Benz GLA. And then of course there are cars in the segment below, and there's even sort of mid-size mainstream SUVs that you can get for less money than this much smaller Lexus. So the UX does go up against a really diverse set of vehicles, and yet, when you get it out here on the road, Lexus show you what their engineers are really all about. And that's because the very particular blend of body control, ride comfort, communicative steering, and high levels of refinement that you get in the UX are genuinely rare in this segment. The small luxury SUV segment is typically pragmatic and quite uninteresting. There are some good cars, they're not all that boring. It's just that most of them strive to provide basic transport with a luxurious badge, an upscale interior, but nothing crazily engaging in terms of driving dynamics. And other cars in this segment, in particular the BMW X1, promise quite a lot by wearing the BMW badge and then come up really short. Because Lexus doesn't really have a history in the small SUV space, the UX kind of came out of the blue and impressed a lot of people, including us, with a lot of its innate refinement. But there's a bigger story than just that, and it's actually the ride and handling of this car that makes it quite impressive. But first of all, let's talk about the engines. The one we've got here is the UX 200, and that's a 2-litre naturally aspirated, direct injected petrol 4-cylinder engine. Now, naturally aspirated engines are becoming rare, full stop, but especially in the luxury space. Virtually all of this car's rivals use turbo petrol engines here in Australia, and that's generally a good thing because turbo petrol engines make a lot more torque low down in the rev range, and so unless you're overtaking on the highway or something, you never really have to rev them out. Their fuel consumption tends to be pretty good, but they're quiet, torquey, and pleasant to drive. Now, the UX goes a different way with its engine shared with vehicles like the Toyota Corolla. But before you recoil, there's so much more sound deadening, so much more refinement in the UX's variant of this engine, or at least the way it sits in the car, that you never think to yourself, man, this is a Lexus with a Corolla engine. That would not be the correct way to sort of look at the UX. Now, the 2-litre makes 126 kilowatts of power and 205 Newton meters of torque. So good power, moderate torque for the class, probably less than moderate actually. Something like an Audi Q3 35 TFSI makes 250 Newton meters lower down in the rev range than this car. But because the engine's direct injected, It's actually not torqueless low down, so I'm at 2,500 revs and I'm 85 speed gently climbing while going uphill. So like, you don't have to thrash it, but if I want to make progress quickly, the CVT will just sit at 6,800 revs and make that kind of din. Speaking of the gearbox, it's a CVT, but it does have a torque converter with one gear to serve as the launch gear for this car, and that helps a lot more than you'd think it would. Step off feels much more natural than a traditional CVT, but most of the time the CVT stays out of your way and you just kind of forget it even is one. It has the simulated gears and all that works fine. The UX 250h hybrid is a 2-litre petrol, similar to this, paired with an electric motor, and then you can go further with a rear electric motor in the all-wheel drive version. Now, that's quieter, it's torquier, and it saves 20 or 30% fuel compared to the standard petrol, but it's also dearer. So I think if you're interested in the hybrid, do test drive them back to back, but the UX 200 is actually quite a charming unit, I reckon. But as I mentioned, it's the ride and handling which tells the story here. Really beautiful steering in this car. It's quite a quick ratio, it's responsive immediately off center, and just sort of dials up the weight as you put input into the car. Feels really natural, the connection to the front wheels. But then, just like some of the other small cars that are based on the TNGA platform and run independent rear suspension like the UX, the steering is so forgiving and the handling is so forgiving in that if you find yourself barreling into a corner, because the car does have high limits, and then you need even more steering, it lets you add even more lock and the car just laps it up. It's delightful. So you find yourself cornering like this thing is a UXF, not like it's a UX 200. And so it just has really high tolerance to driving it in quite a ham-fisted manner. But that means you can really get into the depth of chassis engineering at work here, and it is deep. There's a lot of talent to this car, and the way the rear end just sachets around daintily is truly impressive. The stability control can get a little heavy-handed. Perhaps it's not heavy-handed, perhaps it's that the UX just at times encourages you to drive it really sportily, so it has a bit more work to do. But that's okay. You really can feel this inherently balanced suspension and chassis on this car. It makes its talent very obvious. It's also very quiet, you can probably hear that. The refinement levels are really good. The brake feels good. The visibility out is actually okay. We've got big mirrors. Despite the swoopy looking styling, I can see behind me just fine. The driving position is really good. The steering wheel is small, feels good in the hand. The technology is laid out in quite a good looking dashboard, even though we've got this trackpad which isn't the best. Now, to get features like reversing AEB and blind spot monitoring, you do have to option some things up on the UX. They're not standard on the absolute base car, but as you start to work your way through the range, those features get added on. Forwards AEB with pedestrian and daytime cyclist detection is standard. Lane trace assist is standard. So those two things are definitely good to have. Same with adaptive cruise. But hopefully, as this car gets updated, we'll start seeing the real full Safety Sense Plus package become standard across the whole UX lineup. So those are my opinions on the 2021 Lexus UX. There's no doubt that this crossover is usefully small, it's luxurious inside, and it feels well made, like a true little bank vault, exactly what you would want from a compact Lexus crossover. However, there's no avoiding that it also gets pretty expensive as you start to add desirable features to it, or when you opt for the very frugal hybrid powertrain that's available with this car. So you should closely consider the space that it plays in and whether or not something like a luxury hatchback might drive your dollar even further. However, in the space this car sits in, the other vehicle I'd strongly recommend you look at is the Audi Q3. The Lexus UX, though, has many things that set it apart from its rivals, and it is a pretty desirable small luxury SUV. So I'm keen to know your view. Let me know down below this video what you reckon. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. Don't forget about our email newsletter and a free Chasing Cars sticker. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.